We're talking about Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia. This is a man who built a billion-dollar empire, basically on the principle of not wanting to be a businessman at all.
And then when that success became, a moral burden for him, he just gave the entire thing away.
It's less a business story and more of a philosophical biography, I guess.
It really is. It's about a lifelong anti-establishment ethos that somehow got baked into a global corporation. I mean, you have this guy who, even in his mid-80s, is out in the middle of nowhere catching rainbow trout with this, frustratingly elegant ease.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's perpetually agitated, restless, and it's all about one thing, his net worth.
That's the whole tension, isn't it? This incredible duality. On the one hand, he's this absolute legend of the outdoors. I mean, a pioneering rock climber and ice climber who literally invented the tools for the sport.
Kayaker, surfer, angler, a man who almost died, a dozen times, just pushing his own limits.
And then, on the other hand, he's the guy who founded Patagonia, an apparel company doing over $1 billion in annual sales.
And that success, that billion-dollar number, became his personal hell. When the financial magazines started putting him on their list...
The billionaire list?
Yeah, estimating his net worth at $1.2 billion, Chouinard was genuinely horrified. You have to remember, this is a man who still lives in a simple log cabin.
Cooks with a 50-year-old cast iron skillet, right?
Drives beat-up cars, doesn't own a computer or a cell phone. So for him, being called a billionaire was, and this is his word, blasphemous. It was the ultimate failure.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to trace this completely unique journey. We need to understand how this dirtbag billionaire, as he's been called.
Which is a great term.
It is. How he used his anti-establishment values to shape a corporation that he eventually felt he just had to give away, to create a structure that basically ensures its profits fight the climate crisis forever.
And you have to frame Patagonia correctly from the start. It's not just a company. It's really an alternative vision for how business can work. They set these incredibly high bars for sustainability, for work-life balance, and, maybe most importantly, for political activism.
But the key insight, and they'd be the first to admit this, is the central contradiction at the heart of the whole enterprise, which is that they're a for-profit company. They make extremely high-quality, durable stuff, sure, but at the end of the day, they're selling clothes that people want, not that they strictly need.
And to make those clothes, they're using supply chains that rely on fossil fuels, that generate waste. They are, in a very real way, contributing to the exact problem they say they exist to solve.
Right. They're part of the system they're fighting.
Precisely. And they are relentlessly self-critical about it. This internal hypocrisy, this constant awareness, it doesn't paralyze them. Instead, it becomes the engine. It channels itself into this ferocious drive for constant, radical self-correction. Their failure to be perfect is what makes them try so hard to be better. And that is an incredibly rare thing in a business of this size.
So to really understand why a man would give away $1 billion, you really have to go back to the beginning, where he came from.
Yeah. Yvon Chouinard was born in Lewiston, Maine, 1938. He described it as a time when the world just felt less strained by people, a quieter, greener place.
And his early life was shaped by, a kind of hands-on wisdom that you only get from necessity.
Absolutely. His family were French-speaking immigrants from Quebec, and they really struggled financially. And that instilled in him this deep sense of thriftiness and, toughness.
We have this one anecdote that just captures that whole spirit perfectly. It's a formative memory he has of his father, Gerard.
Who was this mechanical genius, right? Only had 3 years of school, but could fix absolutely anything.
Anything. But when it came to his own body, he took self-sufficiency to a whole other level.
It's a brutal story. Chouinard remembers his father sitting by the wood stove. He had some bad teeth that needed to be pulled, but he refused to pay a dentist.
So what does he do?
He takes a few slugs of whiskey, grabs a pair of electrician's pliers, and just pulls his own teeth out.
Wow.
It's this defining image that led directly to Chouinard's lifelong philosophy. Buy the absolute best tool you can get and keep it for the rest of your life. Quality wasn't a luxury for him. It was a moral imperative, a financial necessity.
And then the family moves. 1946, they go to Burbank, California, and this was a really difficult transition for him.
A huge shock. He was raised speaking French, so he gets to school, he can't communicate, he feels like a total outcast. I think he ran away after just a few days.
Yeah, he was completely disengaged from school, got straight D's, but His real education was happening outdoors.
He was a gifted athlete, but he hated organized sports. He just had this deep aversion to head-to-head competition.
And that led to this critical realization, which basically becomes the blueprint for his entire life. He said, I'd rather invent my own game. Then I can always be a winner. If you set the rules, you're going to win.
He wasn't trying to beat other people. He was trying to define his own challenges on his own terms.
So that impulse first took him to falconry, training birds of prey.
Right, and to get to the nests, the eyries, he had to learn how to rappel down these sheer cliffs. So he's learning to manage risk, to understand that thin line between success and, well, disaster.
And disaster did strike pretty early on. He had his first serious brush with death during a first ascent of a peak called Crooked Thumb.
He lunged for a piece of rock, it was loose, he missed, and he just plummeted 160 feet.
A huge fall. He had a massive gash right down to the bone.
Yeah, but the physical injury wasn't what stuck with him. What really gnawed at him, what haunted him, was the miscalculation. He had failed to correctly judge the rock. In the game that he invented, where the rules are precision and preparation, he had made an intellectual error.
And that drove this obsession with having flawless, reliable equipment. If his own judgment could fail, his tools absolutely could not.
And that is exactly where the business begins. As he gets more into climbing, he's using these things called pitons. They're basically metal spikes you hammer into cracks in the rock to secure your ropes.
But the gear that was available at the time, it was just inadequate.
Totally. It was mostly imported from Europe, made of this soft, mild steel. The idea was that the metal would bend and conform to the shape of the crack, but that meant you could only use them once, maybe twice.
So on these big multi-day climbs in Yosemite, you'd have to haul just dozens and dozens of these things. It was heavy, expensive, and incredibly wasteful.
So in classic Chouinard fashion, he just decided to solve the problem himself. In 1957, Chouinard Equipment is born in a converted chicken coop in his parents' backyard.
He literally taught himself blacksmithing from library books.
Yeah, he went to a junkyard and bought a 138-pound anvil and a coal-fired forge. His first pitons, he made them from a salvaged steel blade from an old farm harvester. It was a piece of high-carbon chromoly steel, which was way harder and more durable than anything else on the market.
And here's the first really critical business lesson. His pitons sold for $1.50 each.
Which was 5 to 10 times more expensive than the imported stuff. The European pitons were, what, 15, 30 cents?
Right. And it flew in the face of all the post-war ideas about cheap, mass-produced consumer goods.
But the business worked instantly. Climbers immediately understood the value. Chouinard's gear was stiffer, you could reuse it over and over, and most importantly, it was life-saving. You could trust it.
So it proves this core idea that consumers would pay a huge premium for quality and durability, for something that lasts forever. And that became the central pillar of everything Patagonia would later become.
He really was this itinerant blacksmith. He refused to let work dictate his life, so he'd just pack up his anvil and forge and live out of the back of his car.
The original dirtbag lifestyle.
Totally. In the mid-50s, he'd be camping by the beach, forging his gear during the day, making his own surfboards, living off canned food. Then, when climbing season started in Yosemite, he'd just drive up and sell his stuff out of the back of his car.
He was profitable, but just barely, right? I read he was sometimes running on a 1% profit margin because he just refused to cut corners on the quality of the steel.
He was obsessed. He even invented these ridiculously specialized tools, like something called the RURP.
The RURP, the Realized Ultimate Reality Piton.
Which is an amazing name. It was this tiny, knife blade thin piton you'd barely tap into cracks that were almost invisible. It wasn't even meant to hold a fall, just the person's body weight for a moment. They called it that because if you fell while you were on one, well, you'd realize ultimate reality pretty quickly.
It just shows that the whole business was driven by solving these extreme niche problems for the most demanding customer he could find, himself.
It's an incredible origin story, just completely rejecting the cheap, fast, disposable culture of the 60s and going back to this artisan, hand-forged quality.
But that very success led directly to his first big moral crisis. By 1970, Chouinard Equipment was completely dominant. They had, what, 80% of the U.S. market for pitons?
An absolute monopoly. But his hard steel reusable pitons were having this terrible, unforeseen consequence.
They were destroying the rock.
Exactly. They were scarring the granite walls of Yosemite, the very places he considered sacred. Because the steel was so hard, hammering it in and out of the same cracks over and over, was literally shattering the rock, widening the cracks. His own product was destroying the environment he loved.
And he felt personally responsible. He had this motto: if you make a mess, you cleaned it up.
So he made what has to be one of the most radical profit-risking decisions in business history. He decided to make his own most successful product obsolete.
I mean, stop and think about that. You have 80% market share, a guaranteed revenue stream, and you just say, nope, we're not making this anymore. That's financially suicidal.
The justification was completely philosophical, not financial. He knew that if he didn't uphold the ethics of the sport, the business wasn't worth having. So the company pivoted. They started looking for an alternative.
Just led to things like chocks and hexes.
Right. These are pieces of aluminum that you jam into cracks by hand. There's no hammering involved. You remove them with a little tool. They cause basically zero damage to the rock.
And that transition really cemented the company's entire worldview. They weren't just selling tools anymore. They were selling a philosophy.
Yeah, their 1970 catalog literally said, "It is the style of the climb, not the attainment of the summit, which is a measure of personal success." It was about engaging with nature lightly, with simplicity.
It was a terrifying business gamble, though. They were telling their most loyal customers to stop buying their most popular product.
And they chose long-term integrity over short-term revenue. And that set the stage for everything.
So the hardware business gets this massive overhaul. And that's when the software, the apparel, starts to come in almost by accident.
And the first thing wasn't some high-tech jacket. It was a rugby shirt.
A rugby shirt.
Yeah, he'd seen them in Scotland and realized they were perfect for climbing. They were made of thick, durable cotton, and the collar protected your neck from the climbing rope slung over your shoulder. They started importing them, and they were a huge hit, partly because they were so colorful. They stood out from all the drab, olive green outdoor gear of the time.
And the big economic idea behind this shift came during that famous 1968 trip to Fitzroy in Patagonia, the Fun Hogs trip with his friend Doug Tompkins.
Right. They were stuck in an ice cave for over a month during a storm. And Tompkins, who went on to found Esprit, he made the argument. He said, look, climbing gear lasts for 10 years, but clothes? People need to replace clothes every year.
Chouinard was resistant at first. He thought clothing was, less noble. It lacked the craftsmanship of his forged steel.
But Tompkins convinced him the market for apparel was infinitely larger, and it had this built-in replacement cycle. It meant consistent revenue.
That then leads to the next big breakthrough, which is synthetic materials. They were looking for something that would work in cold, wet conditions.
And they found this bolt of synthetic, water-repellent acrylic fabric. It was pretty ugly. Bland, tan, light blue. It smelled a little weird at first.
Wow.
But when they stitched it into these simple zip-front sweaters, the performance was revolutionary. They were warm even when they were soaking wet. They didn't hold water, and they dried super fast. It was basically the birth of the synthetic fleece jacket.
But this is also the moment where Patagonia pivots away from natural fibers and toward synthetics, toward plastics, which ironically would later become one of their biggest environmental headaches.
Yeah, they solved one problem and, inadvertently created a much bigger one down the line. That tension between performance and sustainability would define them forever.
Okay, let's pivot from the products to the internal culture, because that was maybe an even bigger innovation. And a lot of this was driven by his wife, Melinda Chouinard, or specifically the on-site daycare center.
The Great Pacific Child Development Center. And this was not a PR stunt. It was born out of pure, chaotic necessity.
Right. The company was full of young families. Maternity leave laws were weak. Good daycare was expensive and hard to find.
The tipping point was literally the sound of a crying baby. An employee named Carissa Ridgway's daughter was making so much noise it was impossible to work. And Melinda realized, if I want to keep good employees, especially mothers, I have to solve this problem.
So she started small, with a trailer in the parking lot. But when they built the new headquarters, she went all in.
It's a great story. She just walked over to the architects, grabbed their blueprints, drew a big square on the first floor and said, this is going to be the daycare. She specified everything, down to the child-sized toilets and sinks.
And the philosophy behind it was pretty groundbreaking. It wasn't just babysitting.
No, it was based on educational theories like Montessori and Steiner. It was all about self-directed play, independence, being outdoors. But the most surprising impact was on the adults.
How so?
Melinda deliberately designed it so the daycare wasn't isolated. The kids were all over the campus. And employees said that just hearing children laughing outside their windows made people nicer to each other. It made the men less aggressive. It just calmed the whole place down.
That's a fascinating unintended consequence.
And it had real business benefits, too. They had near-perfect retention of new mothers. Almost every woman came back to work after maternity leave. Patagonia proved that supporting families wasn't a cost center. It was a strategy for attracting and keeping the best talent.
So, despite this enlightened culture and all the success, the company wasn't immune to the real world. In 1991, they get hit with what they internally called the Black Wednesday crisis.
Yeah, this was a moment where they almost went under. It was a perfect storm. The U.S. was in a recession, interest rates were skyrocketing, and their bank, Security Pacific, was in trouble and started slashing their line of credit.
So they were basically trapped. They had all this inventory, high operating costs, and suddenly the short-term loans they relied on were being called in.
They were deeply in debt. At one point, they were genuinely afraid they wouldn't be able to make payroll.
And this crisis forced Chouinard to confront his own hypocrisy, right?
Absolutely. He admitted, I was growing for the sake of growing and not thinking about what I was doing. He realized that for all his talk, Patagonia was operating just like any other business, vulnerable to the same boom and bust cycles. It was a massive wake-up call.
And that wake-up call led them to look really hard at their supply chain, specifically at conventional cotton.
Right. They sent a team on a fact-finding trip to the cotton fields in California's Central Valley, and what they saw was just shocking.
What did they find?
In the conventional cotton fields, the ground was hard as a rock. It smelled like chemicals, and there were no earthworms, a totally dead soil.
And the contrast with the organic farms.
And it was night and day. The organic farm smelled like life. The soil was soft. It was teeming with insects, bees, and yes, earthworms. The employees came back like religious converts. They were convinced that conventional cotton was poison and Patagonia had to get out.
This leads to one of the company's most legendary decisions. Chouinard issues an ultimatum.
A radical ultimatum. He gave the company 18 months to switch 100% of their cotton products to organic cotton. If they couldn't do it, he said he would get out of the sportswear business entirely.
I mean, that is just an insane risk to take. At the time, organic cotton was rare and super expensive.
It was. They had to slash their product line from 166 items down to 91. Their profit margins took a huge hit at first.
I can't imagine the pressure from the finance department.
But Chouinard wouldn't budge. He said, there is no going back on this decision. He just raised the prices and bet, once again, on his core belief that customers would pay more for integrity and quality. And he was right. Sales recovered, and they basically legitimized the entire organic cotton industry overnight.
Now, at the same time Chouinard is pushing this kind of minimalist, self-correcting idea, his old friend Doug Tompkins is a complete contrast.
They were the perfect foils for each other. Tompkins, who co-founded Esprit, he fully embraced the wealth. His home in San Francisco was like a museum filled with Francis Bacon paintings.
Well, Chouinard is still living like a pauper, basically.
Exactly. But despite those different lifestyles, they shared that core belief from their early days. We humans were destroying our home planet.
And Tompkins, after he sold Esprit, took that idea and ran with it on a scale that is just hard to comprehend.
A truly grand gambit. He started buying up massive amounts of land in South America, close to 800,000 acres, with the goal of rewilding it and turning it all into national parks. He spent nearly $400 million of his own money on it.
It sounds heroic, but he faced a ton of local opposition.
Oh, extreme resistance. He got death threats. He was vilified in the press, called a wacko American. People just couldn't understand it. In a culture without a history of that kind of large-scale philanthropy, they assumed he was a CIA agent or secretly looking for minerals.
So even that kind of radical good came with a cost. And Patagonia was involved in that too, right?
For sure. They helped fund the Patagonia Land Trust, and they would even pay their own employees to fly down to Chile and help tear down fences on the old ranch land.
And these guys, the Dun Boys as they call themselves, they never stopped their high-risk adventures, even into their 70s.
Which leads to that tragic trip in 2015. They were kayaking on a huge lake in Chile, Lago General Carrera.
And this is the trip where Tompkins dies.
It is. They got caught in what Chouinard called a perfect trap, a 40-knot wind at their backs and an equally strong crosswind creating these huge chaotic waves. Their kayak swamped.
Tompkins was in the water for a long time. The air lifted him out, but he died of hypothermia. His internal temperature was down to 66 degrees.
And Chouinard was very blunt about it later. He said they were cavalier, just weren't prepared.
The details are pretty telling.
Very. Chouinard noted that Tompkins, always a bit of a showman, was wearing pressed chinos, a Brooks Brothers shirt, and a light rain jacket. Not exactly survival gear. They always left room for disaster, as Chouinard put it.
And that tragedy really highlighted this stark contrast in how they handled their wealth and legacy. The Tompkins estate ended up in this really ugly legal battle.
Mm-hmm. Tompkins had these strong anti-inheritance views, and he explicitly disinherited his daughters. So his ex-wife and one of his daughters sued the estate for $50 million. It became this very public, very messy fight over money.
Just the exact kind of chaos and division that Chouinard was so desperate to avoid with his own family and company.
Exactly. It was a painful, real-world example of what he was trying to solve.
So after the cotton conversion, after the financial crisis, Patagonia really enters this new phase where activism becomes its core brand identity. They started to weaponize it.
And the ultimate example of that is the Black Friday ad they ran in 2011.
In the New York Times, the one with the headline, "Don't buy this jacket."
It's corporate heresy, right? Just completely subversive. The ad had a picture of one of their best-selling fleece jackets, and then it just meticulously broke down the environmental cost of making it.
Like how many liters of water it took to produce.
Exactly. And the text just urged people to buy less and to reflect before you spend a dime.
The genius of it is that it shames consumerism, while at the same time reinforcing how authentic and trustworthy the brand is. What was the actual business result?
Well, paradoxically, it was a massive, massive success. It generated an estimated $40 to $50 million in free publicity, and customers responded by buying more jackets. They saw the ad as proof of integrity. Patagonia had record sales, which made Chouinard deeply uncomfortable because his dream was to sell less, but it proved that this anti-consumerist message could be incredibly profitable.
Okay, fast forward a few years, and they're dealing with the Midtown uniform problem.
Right. Their fleece and nano-puff vests had become the official uniform of Wall Street. Hedge funds, banks in Manhattan.
But wasn't that just a huge, easy source of revenue? These firms were buying them in massive bulk orders.
They were, but Patagonia saw it as a kind of cultural contamination. These firms were co-branding the vests with their corporate logos and treating them like disposable swag for new hires.
It completely contradicted the message of durability and repair.
Exactly. So they just stopped. They ended the co-logo program for those kinds of firms. It was a brilliant brand move. They chose ethical alignment over easy money. They were basically firing the wrong kind of customer.
Incredible. And that fearless political stance went all the way to confronting the government.
Oh, yeah. Especially during the Trump administration, they filed the first lawsuit in the company's history against a sitting president.
Over the shrinking of the Bears Ears National Monument.
Right. Their website homepage just had a black screen that said, "The president stole your land." They were using their brand as a political weapon.
And that rebellious spirit trickled all the way down to the design team. I love the story about the shorts tag.
It's great. A few designers, without getting official approval, added a hidden message to the tag on their stand-up shorts. On the back, it read, "Vote the assholes out."
And when Chouinard found out,
He didn't fire them. He loved it. He was thrilled. His only response was, "These are great. I need them in a size 32.
this obsession with the message, with quality, was just absolute. I mean, look at the LL Bean story.
That's a huge one. LL Bean, one of their biggest wholesale customers, wanted to place an absolutely enormous order for the stand-up shorts. It would have been a massive profit boost.
And Patagonia just said no.
Why? Because LL Bean wanted to sell the shorts at a small discount. And for Patagonia's leadership, that was a deal breaker. They felt that any discount, no matter how small, undermined the message of premium quality and encouraged a disposable mindset.
They chose the integrity of their price point over a giant pile of cash.
They did. For them, quality was objective. Chouinard used to teach classes on it. He'd argue that a quality product is simply one that fulfills its function and doesn't need to be replaced. Durability is environmental responsibility. As one executive said, the world doesn't need a lot more crappy products.
But for all this clear vision, the company had a lot of instability at the top. They churned through, 6 CEOs in a decade?
It's an alarming rate of turnover. And it really highlights how difficult Chouinard could be, how high his standards were. He famously asked his CFO, Allison May, to take the top job, but refused to give her the title of CEO. He preferred general manager.
And that really bothered her.
Deeply. It was a sign of how his personal idiosyncratic values often steamrolled over professional norms. The job posting for her replacement was basically a copy of Ernest Shackleton's famous ad, looking for men for a hazardous journey.
Low wages, bitter cold. Safe return doubtful.
Exactly. He wanted someone on a mission, not on a career path.
And that mission included a lot of internal reckoning, especially on issues of race and diversity.
For sure. After the murder of George Floyd, they put out this searingly honest statement, basically taking themselves to task. They admitted they were a white-led outdoor company reliant on recreation on stolen native lands that are not yet safe for all.
They recognized that the sports they championed, climbing, skiing, required a level of wealth and access that created huge barriers to entry.
And that led to a lack of diversity inside the company and in their customer base. It was just another example of them turning that critical lens inward, constantly wrestling with their own contradictions.
So all this pressure, all these contradictions, it all comes to a head with the final problem, the billionaire problem.
As you said, it started in 2017 when Forbes put him on their list, and it was his personal nightmare.
He literally told his people, "Get me off that list."
Yeah.
He saw that paper valuation of his wealth as a total moral failure, an insult to his entire identity.
By 2020, with the company just getting more and more successful, he gave his inner circle an ultimatum. The project was codenamed Project Chacabuco.
And the goal was to solve this impossible puzzle. How do you keep the company independent, make sure its profits go to environmental causes forever, and get Yvon Chouinard off the billionaire list?
And all the standard options were on the table, and he rejected every single one.
Selling the company was a non-starter.
Totally. There was a reported $6 billion offer, but he had zero faith that any buyer would keep the company's values intact. They'd cut jobs, compromise ethics. It was out.
Going public.
Even worse, public markets demand endless growth, quarterly profits. It would have destroyed everything the company stood for.
Even employee ownership wasn't the answer for him.
Right, because he couldn't guarantee that future generations of employees facing a tough economy wouldn't vote to maximize their own profits instead of funding environmental work. He concluded there were no good options.
So they just invented a new one. In 2022, they announced they were going purpose.
It is a fascinating, incredibly complex legal structure that they designed to be truly durable. It involved splitting the company into two separate entities.
Okay, let's break that down, starting with the part that holds the control.
That is the Patagonia Purpose Trust. The trust got 2% of the total stock, but, and this is the critical part, it got all of the voting shares. The trust's only job is to protect the company's values, the family and their advisors control it, and it can never be sold.
So that locks in the mission. And the other, 98%, all the financial value, went to the second entity.
That's the Holdfast Collective. It's a 501c4 nonprofit. It holds all the non-voting stock, basically all the billions in equity. It doesn't sell the stock. Instead, it receives every dollar of profit the company makes that isn't reinvested back into the business, and it funnels all of that money forever to environmental causes.
Now, we have to talk about the criticism, because it came fast and hard. People immediately called it a massive tax avoidance scheme. So if the goal was total integrity, why create a structure that's so complex it immediately invites that kind of skepticism?
It's the most important question, and the answer is pretty technical, but it's crucial. First, the tax savings. If they had sold the company for $6 billion, yes, they would have paid over $1 billion in capital gains tax. By donating it, they never personally profited, so there was no capital gains tax. That part is true.
But the real integrity test is in the choice of the 501c4 versus a standard 501c3 charity.
Exactly. A 501c3 is what you normally think of as a charity. And if they donated the stock to one of those, they could have gotten a massive multi-billion-dollar personal tax deduction. They deliberately gave up that huge tax break.
Why? Why would they leave that money on the table?
Because a 501c4 can engage in political activity. It can lobby. It can donate to political candidates. The Chouinards wanted to fund aggressive activism in politics, not just traditional, safe charity work. So they chose political power over a personal tax windfall.
So what did they actually pay in taxes on the deal?
They paid a gift tax of $17.5 million on the 2% of voting shares that went to the trust. The billions in equity were never cashed out. They were just frozen and redirected.
So the complex structure was the only way to achieve both of their non-negotiable goals: permanent control of the company's values and maximum power for political spending.
Precisely. The outcome is that Patagonia now must be profitable, not to make the Chouinards richer, but to fund the Holdfast Collective's fight against the climate crisis. As Melinda Chouinard said after it was done, now we can die in peace.
So even after solving this massive existential problem, Chouinard's brain just keeps working. He arrives at this final critical realization.
Yeah, he realized that even if you make the best, most sustainable clothes in the world, the best you can ever do is less harm. You're slowing down the damage, but you're not actually healing anything.
So if clothing is always going to be part of the problem, what did he see as the solution? The way to actively heal the planet?
Food. The food system. He came to believe that regenerative agriculture was the key to actually restoring the environment. He even hypothesized that the food business could eventually be bigger and more important than the apparel business.
Which is why they founded Patagonia Provisions back in 2012.
Yeah.
And the core idea was simple.
It was. Food can do good. Regenerative farming can actually pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It can rebuild topsoil. It can purify water. So they started looking for products that weren't just tasty, but actively beneficial for the environment.
Things like what?
Tinned seafood was a big one, mussels specifically, because mussels are filter feeders. They literally clean the ocean, and they promoted sustainably caught salmon, things that had a minimal impact.
But the real centerpiece of the strategy, their big bet, is a grain called kernza.
Kernza is amazing. It's a perennial grain, so unlike conventional wheat, which is an annual that you have to till and replant every single year.
Which destroys the soil.
Right. Kernza stays in the ground for years.
And the benefit of that is the root structure.
It's all about the roots. Annual wheat roots go down maybe 5 feet. Kernza roots burrow down 15 feet or more.
Wow.
And those deep roots sequester a huge amount of atmospheric carbon. They build up organic matter in the soil. They prevent erosion. It literally turns a farm from a carbon source into a carbon sink.
So Patagonia is trying to use its market power to scale this up.
Exactly like they did with organic cotton. Right now, almost nobody grows kernza, so Patagonia is paying a big premium for it and putting it in their products. Beer, crackers, pasta, to create a stable market for farmers. They're using their brand to try and bring this revolutionary grain into the mainstream.
That must have had a huge impact on the employees, too, knowing they're part of something bigger than just fleece jackets.
A huge sense of purpose. People there know they're not just going in to perfect a jacket anymore. They're going in to save the planet. The company structure legally binds their job performance to climate funding.
And Chouinard himself, after all this, did he finally find some peace?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, he still complains about product durability and says managers just want to manage. He's still Yvon. But he said he felt this deep sense of relief, that he had finally put his life in order.
He found control by giving it all away.
Exactly. He told an interviewer, "I feel like I could die tomorrow, and the company's going to continue for the next 50 years, and it's going to continue doing the right thing, and I don't have to be around." He successfully downloaded his values into the DNA of the business itself.
So the story of Yvon Chouinard, I mean, it's just a singular one in American history. You go from a teenage blacksmith in a chicken coop selling $1.50 pittance
to a corporate activist who weaponized a billion-dollar company and then turned it into a permanent self-sustaining machine to fight the climate crisis.
He broke every single rule of modern capitalism. He rejected growth for growth's sake. He rejected profit maximization. He rejected personal wealth.
He never stopped questioning the system, and maybe more importantly, he never stopped questioning his own role within it. He realized that the biggest failure wasn't making too little profit, it was growing just for the sake of it.
And it all just goes back to that one question that he asked himself his whole life. Am I doing enough? The answer is no. So how can we do more good with this company?
And the answer he finally landed on was to completely rewire the profit motive itself. Patagonia has to be profitable, but not to enrich shareholders. It has to be profitable to funnel billions into conservation and political action forever.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. Chouinard's ultimate goal is to convince the customer to buy less, buy better, to force corporations and then governments to change.
So think about one simple quality thing in your own life. A tool, a piece of clothing, that cast iron skillet, something you bought because it was the absolute best tool you can get, something you fully intend to keep for the rest of your life. What did that decision cost you up front? And why were you willing to pay that premium in a world that is completely engineered for cheap, fast, and disposable?
That small decision, that commitment to durability, is the beginning of the entire philosophy that Yvon Chouinard built an empire on and then gave away.